I recognize the member for Rothesay.
It's quite unusual to follow the honourable minister, given the fact that he had 40 minutes to speak and he spoke for 10. So I'm a little taken aback here. I'm starting a little sooner than I thought. My colleague in front of me, the member from Sussex and area. A lot of people don't know that I was born in Sussex, and the member in front of me, he and I were born in the same hospital, delivered by the same doctor and the same nurse in the same room. And I sometimes think we were exchanged at birth, but there's other days that's all I have in common with him. So I leave it at that. Anyway, it's an honor and a pleasure to rise in the House today as the member from the riding of Rothesay. Rothesay is a town that existed before Confederation. It's one of the oldest communities in New Brunswick. I was elected in a by-election, which was a tough-fought experience in my life, where I worked extremely hard to win, and then 2 years later I was re-elected, and proud to be re-elected by almost 5 times as many votes as I had. So that's a great endorsement for the people of Rothesay, and I'm very grateful for that. The Minister of Health and I have a standing joke, and I don't know whether he's bragging or complaining when he talks about it, but he takes credit for my political career, and there's a lot to be said for that, and I'm pretty much convinced, had it not been for the present Minister of Health poking the NDP into running, I'm not sure that I would be here today. So for better or for worse, my friend across, Minister of Health, whatever you think of me, you're part of the problem, okay? So they can blame you as much as they can me. But it's a great honor to be an MLA, and I say this from both sides of the House. People have politicians a lot in disrespect these days, and it's very regrettable. I know what it's like to beat on doors and to campaign and to work hard. I know what it's like to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and drive to Fredericton in freezing rain in January. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. And all members of the House here sacrifice a lot to be here. And I think they all should be congratulated and thanked for that, irrespective of your political stripe. Rothesay has a long and proud history in government and business. It's in large measure a bedroom community from St. John, but it has a long history of its own unique nature and character. One of its great traditions is its military tradition and the contributions that people from Rothesay made to our freedoms in several wars that we've had. One of the things that I've never done here, but I think I'll take the opportunity to today, given that this is the first time I'm speaking in the House after Remembrance Day, is that I could comment on the tradition of my father and my 2 uncles in World War II. My father attended the 70th anniversary of D-Day a couple of years ago, where in June of 1944 he drove a landing craft bringing people onto the beaches of Normandy under fire. My uncle was a fighter pilot who fought in the Battle of Britain and who flew air cover during the invasion. My other uncle was a member of the Fort Garry Horse and had a tank brigade and he was killed 30 days after the invasion and is buried there. So my father and my two uncles served our country valiantly. I'm very proud to say that they did. One of the interesting things that a lot of people don't know is that my mother's a Miramichier, and her maiden name was Essen, married the Weekses and all that. And my uncle, the fighter pilot, the late William Weeks, if you research it, was the fighter pilot, and you can get the article from the Miramichi Leader, but he was the Miramichi fighter pilot who was running sorties, and he shot up General Rommel in his staff car, which took Rommel out of the war. And there was a great article in the Miramichi Leader about that. And so I am proud to say that my father, my uncle, who won this Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar, my father, who has 7 medals from World War II, and my other uncle who gave his life. I'm very proud of that tradition. I'm also very grateful for the people of Rothsay. You know, whenever a person decides to do something, enter politics or something like that, if you're the only person who thinks it's a good idea, maybe it's not a good idea. And whether it's whatever endeavor it is, you know, you get that a lot. But I must say I was very grateful that when the vacancy occurred in my riding, I had, although I come from a political family, I had no particular political ambition during my life. I worked very hard as a lawyer. I built some businesses and sold them and was pretty much retired. And the vacancy came up, and my phone started to ring. And as I say, if you're the only one who thinks it's a good idea, maybe you should think it through. But I'm very grateful to the many, many people, my neighbors, my friends, my former employees, lawyers that I worked with and worked against. So many people reached out to me and encouraged me to run. And having lived in that community for 34 years, raised a family, that kind of endorsement is a very humbling and life-affecting experience. I want to thank my executive who worked so hard on my behalf. I want to thank my riding person, Dan Coles, who has worked so hard for me since the day that I was first elected. I'm very grateful. I'm very proud to be from Rothsay. I'm very proud of the people there, and I'm proud to represent this riding. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the member from Quispam-Sis on his success in the leadership campaign. He is a man. He's a man of great conviction. He's a man who's very dedicated to this province, and it is a job where it involves sacrificing your entire life. You have to put your wife aside, your children aside, yourself aside. You have to cancel vacations. You have to do an awful lot of things, and it's a great sacrifice for people who enter politics at that level. And I congratulate Mr. Higgs, my colleague and friend, and I congratulate all the other candidates who are also colleagues and friends in our party at the great and honorable effort that they gave. It is interesting to note that in the campaign there was no mean-spiritedness, there was no animosity, there was no vitriol or anything. Each candidate stated their reasons, their raison d'etre for wanting to run and why they think they should. And when it was over, I can assure you, much to the chagrin of the opposition, we will come together and have come together. We will rally behind our leader. And I suggest that if any of you are thinking of purchasing Fredericton real estate, I think you'd be wise to reconsider. I have here the speech from the throne, which I've reviewed and looked at. And what I find to some extent disturbing is the government has a tendency to judge its zeal by the amount of money it spends. It's money for this, it's money for that, money, 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 money. The spending of money in and of itself is a means to an end. Nothing is free, but just because you're going to spend money doesn't mean you're going to get the desired result. A government's job, in my opinion, is to fund certain aspects of our society, monitor the results of those aspects, adjust accordingly so that the people get the best value that they can. I would ask all people to remember one thing, and I say this with no political bent. I would say this to a PC government, to a liberal government, to any government. One of the most fatal flaws that governments make on any particular project is that those projects are judged by their intention and not by the results. There are many, many, many things that governments do that are extremely well-intentioned, but the results simply do not support the situation. I've observed question period over and over again where there's been great discussion about education. Well, your plan said this, and my plan said that, and how come you didn't follow your plan, and how come you didn't follow my plan? The tragedy of it all is not about all of these plans. The tragedy of it all is that 50% of the graduates from high school cannot pass a basic literacy test. That's the tragedy. Because we need to look at the results, not another government study, another this, another that. The results simply aren't there. If the Department of Education was an automobile company, it would have a 50% recall rate. Now think about it. 50% recall rate. We need not to judge by the intention, we need to judge by the results. And I urge all governments, business, anyone, you're judged by the result. If you hire an investment advisor and he gets you to invest in all these particular things and the value goes down and you lose a lot of money, his intentions were good. He meant well. He didn't want the market to go down. He didn't want the stocks to go down. But how do you judge that type of person? You judge by the results. And one of the greatest things, the biggest mistakes that people make is to do that. If you recall, one of the great examples of that is the United States housing industry. Do you remember a decade or so ago when a lot of people in government in the United States came up with the mantra, every American has the right to own their own home. Doesn't that sound nice? Warms your heart. Every American has a right to their own home. So the government, through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are mortgage insurance companies, started to insure mortgages. Unscrupulous lenders oversold people, put them into houses that they couldn't afford because of government guarantees. Developers built houses there was no market for because they could get a government guarantee and waive the first 24-month payment. So if somebody comes in, sure, I'll take it, sign here, government guarantee. I live in a palace for 24 months. Every American has the right to own their own home. Isn't that nice? But you know something, the statement is lunacy. As nice as it sounds, and as well-intentioned as it is, it resulted in almost the entire meltdown of the Western financial economy as we know it. Motives? Good. Results? Bad. One of the stories I like the best on that is the story of eggs in Bolivia. We all remember when South America was an economic basket case. We're all old enough to remember that. Remember inflation at 200%, riots in the streets, economic chaos. The guy was elected president of Bolivia, and his name was Gomez Sanchez, a genius. Went to the University of Chicago. He was a student of Friedrich Hayek. He was a believer in the economic policies of Milton Friedman. Now he's elected president of Bolivia, and he's got an absolute mess on his hands. And his first problem he had, his first day as president, people were rioting because they had no eggs. Couldn't get an egg in Bolivia anywhere. So he said, how come there's no eggs in Bolivia? Well, they said, we think everybody should have eggs, so the government had regulated the price of eggs. The cheapest eggs in the world were in Bolivia. Regulated price, except there weren't any. The price was the lowest price you could be. So he took drastic measures. He stopped regulating the price of eggs. What happened, Mr. Speaker? Price of eggs went through the roof. Now, there's still no eggs, but they went from government regulation, cheap eggs, government getting out of the egg business, price of eggs went through the roof. Well, all of a sudden, some farmer says, gee, at that price, maybe I'll take my eggs to market. So in he went and he sold them all. Then another farmer decided to do that. Now there's 2 or 3 of them going. Well, then they get to market, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They haven't sold all their eggs yet. So the guy said, well, I don't want to take them home. What am I going to do? Look, I'll give you 10% off if you buy the rest of my eggs because I don't want to take them home. Well, then another farmer came in, and another one. Well, guess what? Now there's lots of eggs because the price is high. Well, now people started saying, well, maybe I'll go to this guy and see how much he's charging for his eggs. Well, guess what? Government got out of the egg business, and because government got out of the egg business, everybody in Bolivia got an egg reasonably priced whenever they wanted it. And the egg industry and the poultry industry thrived. And what we have in South America, which went from an economic basket case, South America is one of the top economies in the world, inflation at 2%, GDP through the roof, because government got out of the business.
That's right.
Because government wasn't the solution, government was the problem. So what's the government's job? Create an environment in which the private sector can properly function. So in education, what is government doing in the education business? Educators should be. Government should fund it, should monitor the results. I have a school, private school in my riding, very well-known school. Used to be called Rothsay Collegiate School. Now, the difference between RCS and the public schools is you have to pay to go, but there's no government involvement. Why is it that the graduates of RNS, why is it that they have amongst the highest scholarship rate in universities? Why is it they score amongst the highest grades for law school aptitude, medical aptitude, university aptitude? What's this little school that has nothing to do with government? How come it produces so many people that can do well? The cost of educating a child at RNS is not much different than what it costs the government to educate a child in Canada. So the money's the same. What's the result? The homeschooling movement, which is huge in North America today. Homeschooled children are entering universities, getting scholarships, doing extremely well. Why? Because we don't monitor results, we monitor intentions. And if you don't start monitoring results, you're never going to achieve the result that you want. So as I've read through this education thing, there's a lot of platitudes in it and things like that. But I know that in the last century, the vast majority of people in Canada and the United States were taught to read by themselves and their parents with a McGuffey's reader. Anybody ever hear of the McGuffey's reader? But the McGuffey's reader educated 2 generations in the United States. Taught them their alphabet, taught them phonetics, taught them what syntax is. What do they do now? There's no benchmarking. There's no bench. I can always count on the member from Restigouche. The point is, you're not monitoring results. You can take that same piece of work, isn't it? You can take that same idea that government very often is not the solution. I think one of the serious problems that we have in the schools today is lack of discipline. I think it's a serious issue. I think kids watch The Simpsons, call their parents a cow, and then they go to school and call their teacher a cow and have a cow man, and guess what? Nothing they can do about it. So the point is, there's many things wrong, but if you don't empower the educators, both to educate and to discipline, and children have to realize that they're going to enter a world where you're not going to get your own way. You're going to enter a world that's full of discipline. You know, you got to stop at a red light and you got to go at a green light. There's certain rules in life that have to be taught, basic principles. We need to get back in our education to looking at the results and educating our children instead of kicking the ball downfield. When I was in school, I played hockey. If my grades weren't at a certain level, the teacher said, if you don't pull up your socks and do better, you're not going to be allowed to play in a high school hockey team. I tell you, it was a heck of a motivator. Do we get that now? No. Whatever. Anything goes. Tragically, it's the kids that are going to pay the price because the gap is growing between education and non-education. Education is the great liberator. Education is what brings people up. Education is what raises the bar in life. And it's not necessarily a college education or any education like that. It is knowledge to do the very best you can. It is learning to do things well. Learning to do things that average is okay. I had a secretary once typed a letter for me and came in, and there was some mistakes in it, and the white on it and everything else like that. And she said to me, "Is that okay?" And I said, "If you have to ask, it's not." Well, there's standards, and our young people are the ones that are going to be hurt if we don't get this right. This so transcends politics. It so goes beyond question period or your report, my report. If we were a car company, we'd have a 50% recall rate. Kids are graduating from high school, they go to get a job in a call center, and they can't pass the basic necessity to function in a call center. Something is terribly wrong. And if we don't get together to fix it, we are going to have a generation where the poor get poorer and the rich get richer, and it's not acceptable. There is such a thing that everyone is entitled to an opportunity, and everyone's entitled to an education. I look at jobs, then I move along. We're going to invest in jobs. No, you don't invest in jobs. You lower taxes and you create an environment where people in the private sector create jobs. Now, the private sector has to be monitored. They can't turn loose, because we know what happens when that happens, when the mighty dollar gets ahead of humanity. That's not a good thing. So there's a job for government to regulate in a proper and fair way. But the government has no reason to get into certain things. You don't invest in something to create a job. You're throwing your money away. And I'll give you a prime example. I mean, I'm not against jobs in Caracat. I think jobs in Caracat are great. But a military shipyard. I mean, who builds ships in the world? Well, two countries build ships in the world. Countries that have a strong military, and companies that geographically must have shipping in order to maintain their standard of living and their flow of goods and services. The Japanese will always be leaders in shipbuilding. The Filipinos will always be leaders in shipbuilding. South Korea will always be leaders in shipbuilding. Why? Because it is in their essential best interests. Japan is a volcanic rock. It has no oil, has no lumber, has very little food, got a little bit of fish, no natural resources. They must import everything in order to sustain their standard of living. So they are going to have shipbuilding. Canada doesn't need that. We've got wheat, we've got beef, we've got oil, we've got zinc, we've got everything. So the raison d'etre for shipbuilding in a rich natural resource country like Canada doesn't exist. So why do we do this? We don't have a strong military. We do the frigate thing, and the government pays that, and I'm not against that. But you can't go against the natural grain of the economy. You can't throw money at something and think it will prosper when it defies all of the rules of commerce and trade and supply and demand that exist in the world today. You're throwing your money away. Find out what you're good at. We're good at lumber, we're good at fish, we're good at agriculture. Technology's growing here. Best and the brightest are doing some wonderful work in software and things like that. But if someone wants to invest in a shirt making company, what are we going to do? Lend them the money? I've got a shirt on here. It says "Made in Malaysia" on the back. If this shirt was made in North America, it would probably cost $100 more. Why? Because the person who made the shirt worked at a lower amount. Instead of buying the cotton from Georgia, they bought it from India at probably 1/10 of the cost. And so with free market and open markets, there's certain things that aren't going to happen. And people talk about protecting jobs, and we've heard Trump go on about all this kind of stuff. But when you go to Walmart and you buy a shirt for $9.99, you want that shirt made in Canada? You better be prepared to pay $199 for that shirt, because our basic economy doesn't support that. Whether it's shipbuilding, whether it's shirts, whatever, we have to find out what we're good at, and government needs to realize they're in the business of creating an environment in which business will prosper. And one of the worst things we do, and I've said this before, we shoot ourselves in the foot. Somebody starts a business, and the business is successful. Employ 100 people, they got customers, they're shipping to the States, everything's great. Well, some guy says, gee, I'm going to start a business like that. So what's he do, Mr. Speaker? Goes to the government, gets $5 million, starts the same business. Well, now you get two of them. And then another guy. Well, one guy who borrowed his money from the bank is competing with another guy who got $5 million free from the government. Well, now all of a sudden, he can't compete with that. One of them doesn't. You get two companies that aren't doing particularly well. Get out of the job creation business. There's an old expression in business. Jobs follow smart money. If we have an environment in which businesses will prosper, businesses trust the government, businesses feel that they're secure, that they're not going to be blindsided. But what have we got? I mean, the list of tax increases here. If someone came 3 years ago and set up a business here, well, look what just happened to them with what the government's done. Their property taxes went up. The income taxes have gone up. Everything's gone up. So all of a sudden, HST's gone up. So all of a sudden, the guy that came here to go to work to set up a business, his entire cost base is gone. Because the basis by which he set up business, his property taxes, his income tax, his ability to attract skilled labor, people like that. Well, what's that do to a government? 30 million in income tax increase, 30 million increase in property tax, 18 million increase in gas tax, $10 million increase in diesel tax, $50 million in tobacco tax, $34 million in corporate income tax, $10 million in property taxes, $3 million in bank charges, $300 million in HST, Mr. Speaker. 21 million gone in tax credit. People who came here to educate their children, now they can't. They can't deduct their tuition anymore. And we wonder why they pack up and leave. Businesses like certainty. Businesses want consistency. Businesses don't like surprises. Businesses want to know that what they get is predictable over the life of the period where which they have to amortize their debt. You don't want to go in to open a steakhouse and do all your stuff and find out the price of beef has gone up 5 times. You need consistency. You need predictability. You need an environment which is friendly to business. You do that, Mr. Speaker, the jobs will come, because jobs will follow the smart money. The field will grow, the crops will grow where there's fertile soil. And this government has just attacked in terms of tax increases. It's unprecedented, and the irony of it, Mr. Speaker, is that there's very little to show for it. If the deficit was cleaned up to zero, and they say that it's less than the previous government, and on paper it is, but you've got to take out the one-time charge for pension, the one-time this and this. If you normalized it, the last budget of the Alward government had about a $100 million deficit. We were there. We had it balanced. There was no, without tax increases, there was no blood in the streets or anything else like that. But even if our deficit was lower, even if our debt hadn't gone up $2 billion, I mean, you know, $500 to $600 million in tax increases, and our deficit is still up $2 billion. We get a bump in interest rates, we're going to have a serious problem. Serious problem. And I looked at one of the other things that I urge the government to take immediate action. They are quick to boast about their relationship with the federal government, but I see again in the throne speech reference to the Canada East pipeline. There's a new guy in the White House in January. He's going to approve the Keystone XL. Keystone XL can be operational in 2.5 years. TransCanada has all the permits it needs in Canada. Doesn't need a thing. They're ready to go. The problem is a presidential permit in the United States. One signature, and Keystone XL, Mr. Speaker, is a go. One signature. The people in Alberta, they don't care really whether it goes east or whether it goes south. They need to get the oil, they need to get their product to international water. Whether it's the Bay of Fundy or whether it's the Gulf of Mexico, they don't particularly care. A tanker's a tanker, global trade is global trade, and they can get that product. I urge the government, this game-changing project, this nation-building project, I urge the government to take the matter up with the federal government and get this thing moving as fast as we can, because the potential for our region is huge. Everything from a second refinery, everything from an upgrader, which is very important that we have an upgrader facilities, because an upgrader is like a mini refinery which takes sulfur and everything else out of oil. That's a $7 billion project in itself. If we don't seize the moment, we're going to lose this. We're going to lose it. The possibility of hundreds of jobs, and we're going to lose it. Seize the moment. Because if Keystone XL gets built and Alberta gets its oil to the Gulf of Mexico, believe me, showing up and saying, well, how about a pipeline out this way? Remember we talked about that? Deader than a doornail, deader than a nit. That's reality. I could go on. I could talk about health care. Health care again. Everything is money, money, money. Aren't we proud of ourselves because we're not going to change the budget? Well, the budget in and of itself is not synonymous with good health care. Does anyone think that the Department of Education and the Department of Health are running at 100% efficiency? Well, I don't think so. Wasn't when I was there. Think you're running at 100% efficiency? If you're not going to touch it, then you must conclude that there is operating at 100% efficiency. My friend over there is a physician. When people get sick, you know what they want? They want the best health care they can get, and they don't give a lick where it is. You want local, or do you want the best? Local's good. I'm not in favor of closing. The minister, or the member from Restigouche, he tried to, when I was Minister of Health, he tried to goad me into saying, what hospitals are you going to close? We don't need to close any. We have to re-establish what goes on in that building. We own the building. The building's paid for. doesn't make any sense to take a wrecking ball to it, but we have to establish the medical needs in that community and focus on that. The average age of the community, Mr. Speaker, is 55. I don't think spending a lot of money on having babies is really maybe the greatest need. I could go on, but I will say this: to do nothing is not an option. To do nothing is failure. And this government, so far, has done nothing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.